All right, so here we are. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to ULT San Diego, here for the Aquarian series. This afternoon, the title of the presentation is Svadharma, and this is going to be given to us by Dr. Ken Campos. And a reading before we begin. From chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita. Perform thou that which thou hast to do, at all times unmindful of the event. For the man who doeth that which he hath to do, without attachment to the result, obtaineth the supreme. Even by action, Janaka and others attained perfection. Even if the good of mankind only is considered by thee, the performance of thy duty will be plain. For whatever is practiced by the most excellent men, that is also practiced by others. The world follows whatever example they set. There is nothing, O son of Pritha, in the three regions of the universe which it is necessary for me to perform, nor anything possible to obtain which I have not obtained. And yet I am constantly in action. If I were not indefatigable in action, all men would presently follow my example. O son of Pritha, if I did not perform actions, these creatures would perish. I should be the cause of confusion of castes and should have slain all these creatures. O son of Bharata, as the ignorant perform the duties of life from the hope of reward, so the wise man, from the wish to bring the world to duty and benefit mankind, should perform his actions without motives of interest. He should not create confusion in the understandings of the ignorant who are inclined to outward works, but by being himself engaged in action, should cause them to act also. All actions are affected by the qualities of nature. The man deluded by ignorance thinks, I am the actor. But he, O strong-armed one, who is acquainted with the nature of the two distinctions of cause and effect, knowing that the qualities act only in the qualities, and that the self is distinct from them, is not attached in action. Those who have not this knowledge are interested in the actions thus brought about by the qualities, and he who is perfectly enlightened should not unsettle those whose discrimination is weak and knowledge incomplete, nor cause them to relax from their duty. Throwing every deed on me, and with thy meditation fixed upon the higher self, resolve to fight without exception, devoid of egotism and free from anguish. Those men who constantly follow this, my doctrine, without reviling it, and with a firm faith, shall be emancipated even by actions. But they who revile it and do not follow it are bewildered in regard to all knowledge and perish, being devoid of discrimination. But the wise man also seeketh for that which is homogeneous with his own nature. All creatures act according to their natures. What then will restraint effect? In every purpose of the senses are fixed affection and dislike. A wise man should not fall in the power of these two passions, for they are the enemies of man. It is better to do one's own duty, even though it be devoid of excellence, than to perform another duty. It is better to perish in the performance of one's own duty. The duty of another is full of danger. we give to you our own Dr. Ken Campos.
Hello there, and thank you very much for that introductory reading from chapter 3, Monica. Really appreciate that. I'm going to be focusing a fair bit on chapter 3 from the Gita, and initially want to do a little share screen. So today is the 28th of September, and the lodge is in San Diego, although at the moment I was on a business meeting, so I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. But we're far enough north that we're not affected by those hurricanes that are down in the Carolinas. As we saw earlier, we have this quote from Hermes: "Karmic responsibility is the pivot of all spiritual growth." And to me, this seems like we're talking about, I'm going to switch back and forth. We're talking about a lever mechanism, a pivot, and karmic responsibility is, of course, this cause and effect, this law of laws that we've talked about so much. And this reminds me, this quote from Hermes, of the saying from the classical Greek geometer fellow Archimedes, who said that if he were given a lever long enough and a fulcrum to put it on, that he could move the whole earth. And I believe with that quote, we're somewhat pointed to the idea of spiritual growth, that is, the idea of Svadharma. And it's a major theme in the secret doctrine as well, the idea of spiritual growth. And we'll then have these slides on definitional things. And of course, this is like carrying coals to Newcastle because many of the audience here already knows about this. But Dharma is a fascinating thing. And as we talk about Svadharma, is our personal Dharma. But Svadharma has various definitions depending on the context. One definition from the Theosophical Glossary, HPB's glossary, is that Svadharma is simply a sacred law, pretty simple, or the Buddhist canon, that is to say, the holy writings in the Buddhist literature. And so that's a very cut and dry Dharma. It also refers to the inner nature of a thing. And then I think for us here today, the idea of Svadharma and our life purpose, in a sense, is duty. And with that, let me give a quote from the Mahatma letters. That's number 126, page 2. So I'll read this. Dharma could be duty. And here the quote is: "My first duty is to my master, and duty, let me tell you, is for us stronger than any friendship or even love. As without this abiding principle, which is the indestructible cement that is held together for so many millenniums, the scattered custodians of nature's grand secrets, our brotherhood, nay, our doctrine itself, should have crumbled long ago into unrecognizable atoms." So I think with that, this duty is on multiple layers. And this quote, of course, is talking about the duty of the Mahatmas, or their masters, and how they have a highest, you might say, level of duty. And it's a whole fascinating thing. And in the business world and in social life and psychological realities, and I've just been at a psychiatry meeting, so I'm thinking about that as well. We talk about life purpose in a very individualistic, very egotistical sort of way. And that's one level of your life purpose, or your Swadharma, or your duty. And then I was go on to say that there's kind of a mental, kind of philosophical, aspirational aspect of duty. And then as one moves further along the spiritual spectrum of consciousness and identity, as I said, is one of the major themes of the secret doctrine, you get into other aspects of duty as well. That Hermes quote talks about karma. So let me just bounce back to that for a quick moment. Another share screen. Just like Dharma, karma itself seems to have different kinds of meanings. I think in the modern Western world, here in the US, maybe Europe, England, a lot of people use the word karma as if it were retribution, but it's really not that. And that's maybe a simplistic sort of pop culture definition from New Agey people that, oh, you did a bad thing and you're gonna, get a parking ticket or something like that, or a speeding ticket on the highway because you kicked your dog or something like that. So that's one sort of funny aspect of the use of the word karma. However, for us as students of theosophy, and I do count myself as a humble student, um, karma really has the idea of being the one law or the law of laws, and it's a very, very sacred thing, a very primordial aspect of the structure of the world, of the universe. And of course, it's also connected to the gunas and things in our manifested reality. Karma does regulate cause and effect, and that does bring to mind the nidanas from Buddhism, this idea that there's a set of causes that are concatenated, first this, then that, then another thing, sort of like a Rube Goldberg kind of mechanistic concatenation. And in our materialistic world, that does make sense. And so Buddhism does talk about the nidanas. It's hard to say. And on the next slide, I have some details from a previous Aquarian series talk. So karma has a couple of different facets. There's the main Sanskrit word action, but then action can have different sorts of facets to it. It could be a ritualistic action, some sacrifice, or burning candles, or burning oil, or prayers, or chanting mantras. So there's ritualistic actions. There's moral actions, which you might say kind of relate to the interaction we have with other people. And some folks have philosophically divided the good, the true, and the beautiful, that sort of triad of things, into the I, the we, and the it, as if they're three orthogonal axes like X, Y, and Z axis. And the moral action is going to be in the realm of the we. The I is, of course, personal and subjective. The it is something external and objective. But the moral part, the we, is a very fascinating dimension of our world. And that could be another facet of karma. And the other aspect is past causes. And the fifth one is future effects, getting back to the nidanas. And then transferable merit. This concept, I think, relates to the idea of the path of our Sutratman through the different incarnations that we postulate here in our theosophical belief system and our doctrines from the Secret Doctrine and Blavatsky's writings and that sort of thing. Next, I wanted to go over the another sort of basic idea, the human constitution. And part of the idea of the constitution of us has to do with our sense of identity, like who are we or who am I? And that, to a large extent, I think connects to the idea of our level of consciousness. And I do like the idea that Ken Wilber and other pop philosophers talk about, to transcend and include, that we include our simpler aspects, say like the comic instinctual aspect, or the kama manas part of our mind, and our manasic aspect, and that we can include that. We never get rid of it. We include it, but then we can move to higher levels going through the Ataskarana and that sort of thing. So the first of these three levels, in my understanding as a student, is that the Hindus have the five koshas, and in Theosophy we have the seven principles: the Shula Sarira, Linga Sharira, the Prana, Kamic, Manasic. And so we have the lower quaternary and the higher triad. And then I wanted to focus on, for this first aspect of Svadharma, the Shula Sarira, or the Annamaya Kosha. Another way of looking at that is by saying, okay, we have our body and our psyche, we have memories, thoughts, emotions, sensations, this sense of identity of I am Mr. Smith, or I am Dr. Ken. I am this individual person that has this history, that had this childhood, adverse childhood events, different career things I've done in my life, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's really important to, I'm going to stop sharing. That's really important to kind of say, okay, where are we? Where are we at? And in my looking at various aspects of literature and perusing the internet, I came across an amusing short film, which I'll share here. I can get back to my share screen. And it has the title Svadharma. And it's a 20-minute short film from a few years back about a Hindu Indian young man, and they're mostly speaking a modern Hindu language, but they sprinkle a little bit of English in there as well. And even on his t-shirt, it says, "Who am I?" So this idea of identity has a lot to do with one's duty. So it's one's duty or one's purpose at that level of identity. So in this first more Shula Sarira oriented uh, level of identity that we might take in our day-to-day life, and we have the different sort of Hindu Indian caste system, so being a householder, that sort of thing. A lot of that is related to things that we are very much attached to. And in this cute little film, this confused young man here eventually decides that he likes playing the flute and taking pictures, photography. So these are things related to attachments, you might say, to personal interests. And this is almost the opposite of the reading that we heard from Monica, and these ideas that one is detached from likes and dislikes, and you're able to move to another level. But I think you have to start where you're at. And for many people, this egoic sense of identity is where we're at. Then the next level, as we go through this idea of identity and Svadharma and what's the duty at these different levels. So one might say that in what I'm calling a second level of awareness or consciousness, again, it's like your level of who am I? Then you say, okay, I'm now more identified with my uh, monastic self and maybe even my higher monastic self. And you want to have this idea that I'm a spiritual being. And you might hold that in your mind. And maybe that's a sense of identity. And occasionally I'll hear people say cute little sayings like, I'm a spiritual being having human experience, things along those lines. And one might be guided kind of intellectually to a large extent, but still somewhat egoically with a little e ego, the little s self, by spiritual ideas from, say, Christianity, Ten Commandments, or other sort of Abrahamic religious ideas, and Muslim or even LDS people, Mormons, uh, different religious groups. So Buddhists who are maybe like householder, ordinary day-to-day folks would have their ideas about right action and right livelihood and that sort of thing, but then still kind of connected to the results of those right actions. So that's one level of awareness where you might be aspiring to higher things like compassion or charity, or maybe some rich person, say like Andrew Carnegie, who built libraries, but it was still kind of connected to something egotistical for him because he might put his name on the library. So naming rights to name your building or something. Philosophical aspirations, like helping people to go to school and read books. So that's philosophical, but it's still a level of aspiration, but it's a little bit beyond the self, but it's not as far along as one could go with the idea of this journey uh, that Blavatsky talks to us about, being on this obligatory pilgrimage. And the idea from these first and second levels of awareness is something that people like Simon Sinek talk about, the why, like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? And as I was mentioning earlier, business marketers and advertisers and great political communicators, even folks like from World War II, oh gosh, I'm blocking on his name at the moment, giving great speeches in England about never giving up despite their being pummeled by Germany, and really having a why. And that's I think a very interesting aspect about Svadharma. What am I doing? What am I about? And as one goes through the lower kama manas sort of level of thinking and identity, where you're still attached to maybe instinctual drives and things you like, things you don't like, then we move forward with this idea of this second level of awareness. And then we have here a little drawing from an older Aquarian almanac. So you include, I am Mr. Smith, my personal consciousness, and I am a spiritual being. So you can move into these higher levels of sense of identity. And that's very important. And then going back to the the Bhagavad Gita, we have in the first chapter this rather terrible situation, and some call it the despondency of Arjuna, the great warrior and um, the great archer, and so he was really quite competent in those regards. But he had a lot of ideas about what he liked and what he didn't like, and he's caught up in the first chapter of the Gita with these ideas that he might be committing a sin if he kills people, and that would be a bad thing to do. So he's still kind of connected to the results of his actions and keeping the idea that he's the actor in that first chapter. And that is going back to this theme I'm talking about of one sense of identity. And later in the chapter 3, which Judge titles the devotion through the right performance of action, and then in the CGP Gita translation, the title of chapter 3 is Karma Yoga. And we actually did have a talk a while ago about Karma Yoga. And let me just go ahead and share this picture from the internet about Arjuna having his colloquy, his conversation with Lord Krishna. And this is very symbolic, I think, for our obligatory pilgrimage. What are we doing as individuals? Sometimes we might say this conversation is within when we go into our meditational practices and kind of touch into these higher levels of consciousness that are actually within us. So going inward is a very important skill and ability that we can gain with further practice, like the contemplative mindset, and then the concentration, and then getting into other forms of meditation, and then things like the uh, Japanese Zen idea of bare awareness kind of meditation. So in the Gita, chapter 3, like I said, it's karma yoga, the yoga of action, or this title I just mentioned, the devotion to the right performance of action. So there's a couple ways of titling that. And now I wanted to read a quote from The Voice of the Silence. And this is one long sentence, that's all it's on 3 lines. It goes as follows. Follow the wheel of life. Follow the wheel of duty to race and kin, to friend and foe, and close thy mind to pleasures as to pain. So again, this is the place, the transition that Arjuna finds himself at, or that any of us would find ourselves at, of being attached to things, having our likes, our dislikes, having lots of judgments and assessments, and then beginning maybe to put a little chink in the armor of being able to just experience things as they are in the moment. But basically, in Western civilization, I'm sure many other civilizations as well, we are acculturated to make decisions. And of course, from a biological, sort of like a kama manas, instinctual level, different animals, that sort of thing, as we've evolved to be humans, the idea of being able to be alert to predators is important. And if you look at other, say, primate species, that would be like a group of, say, monkeys on the savannah in Africa, and some guard monkeys are keeping a track of any jackals or lions that might be coming by. So they're kind of anxious and high strung. So we do have this idea, and it's kind of built into our biology. And so this is quite a task that Blavatsky has pointed out to us, the obligatory pilgrimage, and this task of being able to perform duty and to then close our mind, to stop part of our inherent nervous system from pleasure or pain, or from feeling safe or feeling in danger by a tiger or a jackal or a lion or something like that. So it really does represent building a skill, and it's a personal developmental skill, and that allows us then to discover our Svadharma. And indeed, just like Arjuna in the Gita story, he actually was consciously aware when he was working to develop his archery ability, and working to develop his physical strength, and working to develop his ideas of strategy. So we can't totally ignore those things that we've done in our life. And curiously enough, I think I'm going to stop for a moment. Curiously enough, in our lives, just as the reading that Monica gave us, um, we might be influenced by our family. For instance, I was at a meeting of other psychiatrists, and one practitioner said that in her childhood, her dad wanted her to be a doctor. She didn't really want to do that, but she did it anyway. Then eventually went to medical school, became a doctor. And so the question is, was she really following her Svadharma, or was it just influenced by cultural and familial expectations? And that part of what we hear in chapter 3 is that it's better to do your own dharma, your own Svadharma, even if you don't do it excellently, than to do somebody else's dharma, somebody else's Svadharma. So this is a very important thing, and the Gita does talk about that. So let me go back to the slides and the idea of karma yoga as it relates to Svadharma. And so here we have a quote from a previous Aquarian Almanac, but I wanted to share it again. And I'll just read this aloud. Karma yoga was introduced to the West primarily through the Bhagavad Gita. It's through this sacred text wherein we explore the practices and methods that lead the aspirant, that's us, towards liberation from attachment to the sensuous world, the world of our sight, seeing, hearing, tasting, and the world of opposites, this Mayavic world that is built with the gunas. And this is a world of suffering. And we can go on this path through selfless action, as one of the notes here, with full attention given to the divine universality, knowledge of the solidarity of all sentient life. And of course, chapter 2 is about the yoga of knowledge. Detachment from the results or the effects of action, and that is to be detached from the fruits of action, as some of the voice of the silence and Gita talks about, that language. To serve others with beneficence and without any consideration as to any benefit to the self. And this is a renunciation, this is a sacrifice. And here the words are surrendering all consequences to the law. And this, of course, is the law of karma, this fundamental law of cause and effect, this foundational aspect, which I believe, and many of us students of theosophy have the notion that karma is ultimately loving and beneficent. It's a very positive thing, although people may see it from a negative perspective if you're in that lower egoic sense, like, oh, it's retribution, it's punishment. But it's not. It's really about balance, restoring balance in the energies of your life. Another sentence here is full acceptance. So karma yoga is full acceptance of one's own dharma, and one's own dharma is, guess what? Svadharma. Except that's a way of just spreading it out in English words. So one's own dharma and the dharma of all sentient beings. So your own Svadharma, and then the purpose and the reason that other people and things and animals and plants exist. What is their dharma? This includes these practices and skill development of steadiness and concentration and contemplation, and to have that while we are still engaged in action in the world. So we want to stay in action. And that's another kind of conversation that Arjuna has with Krishna when he's acting confused, like that little cute video of the young man with the t-shirt, who am I, And Arjuna is asking, oh, Krishna, you've been saying all these things and I'm confused. What do you really mean? Should we be in just meditative, contemplative stuff, or should we stay in action? And then, of course, Krishna gives the response that, well, action is far better. Action is better than inaction. You have to stay in action. And here we have that very quote. I just got a little ahead of myself there. So here's another of the fun artwork that many Krishna devotees and other people on the internet have put out there. And here's that quote: perform your obligatory duty because action is indeed better than inaction. So that's a really key point of karma yoga, that we want to stay in action. And the whole thing with the Svadharma is that we have a purpose and we should fulfill that purpose. And this is a different kind of philosophy than the idea of retiring to a cave in the Tibetan mountains and just meditating, silently being disengaged from the world and from people, or say in European Christendom, going into a monastery or something that I've heard of, which is even more wildly extreme. I don't know if any of you here have heard of anchorites. These are sort of people that were pillars of solidity in a medieval, Christian Europe. Some of them would actually live in a small cell. They would get walled into a cell in the wall of a cathedral or a church, and then, like they're in prison, have the food and whatnot given to them, bring water in, et cetera, et cetera. And they would just live their life in a little cell, being an anchorite. So this is a form of action. You might say thinking, praying, chanting, that's a kind of action, but it's not the sort of action that might be us in the world of form and involving ourselves with other people. And again, just to repeat a little bit, we have this aspect from the Gita. As I mentioned earlier, Krishna starts asking why he's going into battle to do these horrendous things. And then verse 8, as we just saw, do and perform the proper actions, and that action is superior to inaction. And then Krishna adds this little extra tidbit saying that part of the rationale of that is the journey of our mortal form cannot be accomplished by inaction. So we have to do some kind of action. And now we're entering, I would say, into this third aspect from the little e ego or the little s self, that kind of personalized, I like this, I don't like that, like the young man in the movie, I like playing the flute, I like taking pictures, I like going to the beach. This is my purpose in life. Or a businessman, I like, doing XYZ in business. And then this third aspect, and then we get to that philosophical aspect. And the third one is um, after the personal and the aspirational aspect, then you align yourself with the Buddhimanas, the higher spirit. And then we have a quote here from verses, well, actually, in the Gita, early in the chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. Let me just read them real quick. 7 is, but he who controlling the senses through the mind uses the organs of action without becoming attached towards sense objects, thus practicing the yoga of action, karma yoga. He who does that gains excellence. And do thou perform the obligatory activities, for action is better than non-action. Without work, even the bare sustenance of the body is not possible. And then we in San Diego like to call these the unlocking quotes that are in the CGP translation of the Gita. Karma yoga means performing all actions with a special mental attitude. And that mental attitude is this renunciation, this idea that I am not the actor and I'm not doing it for me. I am, in a sense, doing it as an act of sacrifice. You might say everything I do is a ritual act of devotion to the higher self, to Krishna in the lingo of the Gita, to Krishna. But Krishna really is symbolic of our higher self, that radiance. And here's another little drawing that I copied from another Aquarian almanac. So again, it goes over the body, psyche, this Mr. Smith level, the soul level, I'm a spiritual being. And then we get into the this higher level of activity and a higher level of, I should say, identity from which we can act. But from that identity, like who am I question. So these are like 3 levels of who am I? Well, I'm this, I'm that, I'm now something even larger than the small Mr. Smith, the personal consciousness. However, we're living in the materialistic world, in this myopic world, and we include Mr. Smith as part of our sense of identity, but our identity is now expanded. But Mr. Smith is still a part of that. So, here in the video, you might say this guy in the blue shirt, still a part of that larger identity, but that's not all that I am. And indeed, later in the Gita, Krishna talks about the idea that at his level of consciousness, this Krishna level, he's part of everything, but not within any of those things. So this would be akin to the idea of saying, I'm part of me is this guy in the blue shirt, but that's not all that I am. And part of me is in this mind, but that's also not all that I am. So this spiritual identity and this ego identity. And then from those senses of identity, then we can then come to say, well, what is our purpose? What's our Svadharma? in that sense of identity. So these relate to levels of consciousness which we can explore and expand through our meditational practices. And let me see here. As one moves forward in this transition from the small self to the more aspirational self, and then through our own spiritual work and our meditational work, one can then achieve a state of mind which some call manas tajasi, manas tajasi. And that would be kind of like a peak to a higher level of consciousness. And this is, you might say, reason, the manasic level of our being, reason illumined by spirit. Now, curiously, some people even divide what we call the one principle of manas into 6 different layers. So we have the lower manas and its couple of different parts, the kama manasic part, another part of lower manas, then the ataskarana part, we have the higher manas, of buddhi manas, and then this manas taijasi, which is this little transition piece that I think is a rare achievement, a rare attainment of consciousness and identity. And here you might say that higher manas is overshadowed by buddhi. And that's a fascinating idea. So then we go way beyond the sense of our ego identity and get into this third level of awareness, you might say. And it could be something that we just touch on momentarily here and there in our life, but it can then inform our day-to-day activities. And curiously, before I got seriously into theosophy, I was in Los Angeles and studied Kabbalah with a Los Angeles-based group, and came across some Hindu ideas. And one of them from the old Kabbalistic Hindus is that everything they did in life was a prayer. So like washing the dishes, planting something in the garden, milking the cow, everything was a prayer. And so I think in their own way, in that different cultural reality, they were doing something very similar to this idea of the higher mind, the aspirational mind, being illumined by spirit, as we say in our theosophical parlance. So I think different cultures around the world have gone in this direction. And let me come back to the Gita again. So near the end of chapter 3, we have verse 25. And Krishna speaks, as the unenlightened person, as the unenlightened work attached to action, O son of Bharata, so too the enlightened man works without attachment for the welfare of the world. And in the Judge translation, O son of Bharata, as the ignorant perform the duties of life from the hope of reward, so the wise man, from the wish to bring the world, to duty and benefit mankind, should perform his actions without motive of interest. And the unlocking quote about this, very similar translations, is from the Voice of the Silence, a question. Hast thou attuned thy heart and thy mind to the great mind and heart of all mankind? And again, this, I think, harkens to the idea of the Taijasi Manas, the idea of having our higher monastic sense of identity illumined and illumined by spirit. And I think in European Christian, iconography, when people have halos, or even in some drawings of primitive shamans, they might have a light around their head. This idea that our mind can be illumined by spirit is not a foreign idea, and it's not a weird idea. It's something that has, I think, a cross-cultural reality in our human experiences, that there are different people that have been able to reach to this level. And for me, that's very encouraging that as students of theosophy, this is a real possibility. It's not something that's only available to an advanced guru in the mountains of Tibet, or only available to the Dalai Lama, but that it's available sort of across the board, like a little d-democratic availability. And I think the other thing that I believe in is the idea that we don't have to be in that state of mind or that state of consciousness all the time. Just like the ebb and flow of the ocean, when the tides go in and the tides go out, or in our daily cyclicity, where we're asleep part of the day, we're awake part of the day, that these states of consciousness may not be permanent all the time. And so then the question is, how do you go into those states of consciousness? So clearly, the idea of performing your duty is a big deal. And let me turn to someone that is, uh, I would say, in recent history, quite possibly an adept, and that's from recent last century. Um, this attorney guy who turned into the liberator of India from British colonialism. So doing kind of things in the world, but he took some vows. And I think with these vows, it's like that idea of the philosophical aspiration. And here we have a quote from Mohandas Gandhi. A vow means unflinching determination and helps us against temptations. Determination is worth nothing if it bends before discomfort. So even in that little public domain photograph of Mahatma Gandhi, we have this idea of being separated from our likes and dislikes, being separated from pain and pleasure, being separated from this world of duality, and moving forward with a vow, regardless of the of what it costs us, you might say. And that's kind of a fascinating little thing. And then some more quotes from this idea of using the vows to achieve a degree of freedom. This will be the last, next to the last slide here. I'll just read this. This is again on renunciation and sacrifice. So these vows that Gandhi talks about are like that. And that could be part of the practice, the day-to-day, what do we do, the actionable items that can allow us to achieve these higher levels of consciousness, to put them on a up and down hierarchy. And it's kind of within. So it's like you don't have to really go anywhere to get to them. You have to do your meditational work and then have these vows and then change your sense of identity. And it is a practice. So sometimes I'll think of myself like, oh, I'm like this bottle of water, plastic bottle on the table. I'm in this physical body, but I'm not physical body. And that sort of like mental gymnastics, I think, is a little practice I like to do. So here we have this quote, renunciation and sacrifice from verse 31. So in the William Point Judge translation, those men who constantly follow the thy doctrine, I think it's supposed to say the words um, the AI typing here changed it. So those men who constantly follow thy doctrine without reviling it. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it should be my doctrine. So Krishna is speaking and he's saying about following my doctrine. Those men who constantly follow my doctrine without reviling it and with a firm faith shall be emancipated even by actions. Then in the CGP quotation translation, we have those who, full of faith, ever following the teachings of mine without a veil, they too are released from the bondage of works. And the person speaking here is Krishna talking to Arjuna. And this idea of being freed from the bondage of works, in a sense, the adept, as Mahatma Gandhi might be moving towards that adept category, it's said that the adept acts in the world but is free from a karmic balance sheet. And in a sense, that's what the Gita is trying to, and in the Gita that Krishna is trying to teach Arjuna. Well, do your duty, do your Svadharma. It may involve going into war, it may involve killing people. Then in chapter 11, kind of reveals to Arjuna that, well, the results have already happened throughout space and time. Don't worry about it. They're already dead. That sort of thing. They're already born. This whole thing in our Mayavic world is already happening. So don't worry about it. Just keep doing your duty that you have to do as your sense of consciousness that's kind of trapped in a sense in the little body, and you're moving through that on this obligatory pilgrimage. And then as we go through our karmic cycle, through our lifetimes ascending and descending, and then going through the the space between lifetimes, and then having our experiences, that we are growing on this path. And the unlocking quote here from Dayaneshwar is, the performance of one duty is in itself the highest sacrifice, yajna, and the man who is devoted with such sacrifice is free from all bonds. And so I'll just come back to saying, what is Svadharma? It's doing your own duty in a way that through your own intuitions, your own gut feelings, your own sense of what's right for you and maybe not for your parents or for the culture that you're in, but what's right for you in this incarnation is what you need to do. And you'll practice that skill, maybe being a painter, being a piano player, being an archer, whatever it is you're doing, and then do that with complete renunciation and sacrifice, and realize that you're ultimately not the doer. You're not doing any of that stuff, but it's spirit acting through you. These higher levels, these Atma Buddhi level are functioning through us, and that's, I guess, the gift we have is to go through those experiences. So it's been my pleasure to talk about Svadharma today as we all figure out, okay, what is my main purpose? I've got a better sense of that with each passing year and moving forward as I go. And here's an old photograph of the lodge in San Diego. Now we have red colored awnings, but I want to thank you all for being here and turn it back to Monica for some Q&A.
Ah, am I doing the right thing here?
Don't feel red up there.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Ken. What a wonderful presentation. So comprehensive. We want to open up now to questions. I'm going to go right to the chat because I saw them kind of building up. Richard Pouncey says, who am I? I am no thing. Beautiful. Victor Williams, to everyone, awesome. So, two really good comments. But Judy, Dr. Judy Salzman has her hand up. Judy, a question?
Yes,
Comment?
thank you very much for your presentation. Again, it was very enlightening. The idea of Swadharma is supremely important because I think in that first line you quoted that where it says, my first duty is to my master. The idea of who the master is very important. It would not be, theosophically speaking, a personality, but it would be the higher self, and certainly those we understand to be Mahatma's masters are certainly connected to our higher self. So I'm wondering if you would agree with that, and also with the idea that when it comes to karma, I've had so many arguments with my students that they think karma is determinism. That, well, it's just your karma to have an auto accident or be sick, or it's usually something negative, or to marry that person or whatever. But to try to get people to understand that we are the creators of karma. I mean, we are the creators of really everything, and not in our present form. But this seems to be very difficult, but it seems to be necessary for Svadharma, impersonality, not seeking reward, and understanding that we are the makers of karma. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And yes, there really, I think the two things. One is that Krishna and the masters represent our higher self. So it's like an inner part of us. If we think of our this theosophical doctrine that we're part of a ray from Atma, from this first fundamental principle of this ineffable thing that's beyond our mammalian brains to conceptualize. So if we accept that there's this principle out there, this first fundamental principle, and that each of us in our own form is like a ray of that or a part of that, and we participate in that, and we're ultimately connected to that, and that is our higher self, that thing that's not a thing. Like in the chats, I am no thing, so it's not a thing at all. It's sort of like a function, a mathematical function maybe. And then the idea of the Trimurtis and Vishnu and Shiva, these are like lower level emanations, and that Krishna himself is like an incarnation of Vishnu. So all of those things are, in a sense, within us, and that by going within, we can uh, be in alignment with and perform our duties for that higher self that's part of us. And then the second thing you mentioned is this idea of karma as sort of like a punishment or a retribution. And again, I was kind of laughing out loud at that one because so many people believe that in their limited understanding. And my only way to really accept those folks is say, make the analogy to kindergarten, elementary school, junior high, high school, that people have a certain understanding of things at a certain level of awareness. Sort of like in kindergarten, when you might have only 8 coloring crayons in your coloring box. Then later in art school, you have a whole palette and you're into like different sorts of nuances of shades and tints of color and have a much greater understanding of colors than just 8 color crayons. And so I think that college students and a lot of people in modern pop culture today view karma as something that's negative and also kind of a punishment idea. The third thing you mentioned is that we are the ones that create our karma, and I would say yes, absolutely, because karma is, I believe, in my understanding of it as a student of theosophy, it's generated by our attachment to what we're doing. And I think the way we're acculturated as humans in different cultures around the world, there is an attachment to the result. And more I'm finding advanced, not only advanced meditators, but even advanced other folks, say athletes or business people that are in this advanced level saying, you just got to keep doing your process. Just got to keep doing your process. And the result will happen or not happen. Don't worry about it. Do your process and have a fidelity to your process. And so I think Svadharma really is about having a fidelity to your purpose in life. That's how I would respond to that. Thanks for that question. Who else we have there? Monica?
Thank you. Diane has a hand up.
Yes, Diane, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm trying to formulate a rational question, and
Okay.
I just had this kind of intuition. I'm wondering, does number 7 have anything to do with this idea of svadharma or duties or categories? I'm just curious because there's 7 colors and there's 7 notes, and 7 planets. I'm wondering if there are 7 categories of Svadharma.
Well, you know what? That does resonate with what I was saying about the 3 and the idea of our one of the earlier slides there was going on these ideas of uh, the body, the psyche, the soul, and the spirit. And so that's just 4. And the Hindus have the 5 koshas, the Annamaya kosha, the different sort of it's like Russian nested dolls. However, with HPB and theosophy, somehow we got to 7. Guess what? So 7 is a very important number. And those would be the 7 principles, the Stula Sharira, hard to say that word, the Linga Sharira, the Kama, the Mana, the Kama, the Prana, and they get reversed sometimes, Prana first, then Kama, or Kama, then Prana, the Manas, and the Buddhi, and the Atman. So those 7 things, each in a sense represent a layer or a level, again, going back to sort of like an architectural, floors in a building kind of level of consciousness. Or some people like to say vibration. So a vibrational frequency state of our brain and our mind and our energy. So yeah, 7 is certainly very important. And the idea of musical notes is important. Western, what shall I say? Opticians have come up with 7 colors, even though we know there's more colors than that. So in this, like my little mouse pad here has got the symbol of the prism, like Sir Isaac Newton, and that's actually from Pink Floyd, the rock band. But yeah, the red, orange, green. I'm sorry, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So there's those classical seven colors. So seven has a great resonance to it. And then the idea of the paramitas. Some Buddhist traditions talk about six in Theosophy, and in the Voice of the Silence, we talk about seven. So we have three on either side, and then a central paramita, which will be a future was it a recent? I'm sorry, I'm confused in time. It was a recent Aquarian Almanac talk. So yeah, seven is very important in many different dimensions.
Thank you. The Diane brought up that number seven. It once again, this statement from Mr. Judge comes up over and over again, acting for and as the self-evolve, and that it seems a bit of a mountain to climb, to say the least, in the sense that referring to what Diane was asking, there has to be some accomplishment with and focus within ourselves, it would seem, that we are somehow able to have our focus in what appears to be two different directions in terms of doing the Dharma, the external Dharma and duties that we're required, and all while doing that focused on this highest aspect of ourselves. And so can't be easy, but when Diane spoke of the seven, it put in this student's mind that there are plenty of places to land while we're accomplishing that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that comment there, Monica.
Desiree has a question, has her
There's
hand
more
up.
questions. All right, Diz, hello.
Again, nice to see you.
Greetings from Boston. I mean, Baltimore. Where am I? I'm in Baltimore.
Well, we miss you in San Diego. Thanks for this presentation, getting us up to speed on Svadharma, and for bringing in Karma Yoga and its relation to Svadharma. I was wondering, is there a relation also, or can you speak of the relation that Bhakti Yoga has with Svadharma, given that they're both based in large part on devotion?
Yes, and Des, you may have noticed the green slide was from one of your talks on Karma Yoga. But on my internet, it's like, okay, what slides can I use? What pictures? So it was just a little saving there. So I appreciate. Thank you for the Karma Yoga talk. The other yoga, and there's several different schools of yoga. So Bhakti Yoga is about devotion, and indeed, as William Kwan Judge has titled in his translation of the title of Chapter 3 from the Sanskrit. The devotion through the right performance of action it gets very much to this idea of devotion, so the bhakti aspect. And indeed, with the idea that, like in the classical Kabbalistic Hebrew idea, or the vow of Mahatma Gandhi, or some of our ideas of in the Gita, to perform actions not as me, the actor, as myself, but perform the action because there is no actor. I'm not the actor, but have everything be kind of a sacrificial renunciation of the lower sense of identity to the higher. And then, as Judy was saying in the first question there, that the higher is really part of ourself. So it's not some separate other external icon or deity or God somewhere on a mountain, Mount Meru or Mount Sinai or Mount Olympus, but it's really within us. And that the idea of bhakti and this devotion, I think, really ties in intimately to the idea of Svadharma as we perform our duties. Does that seem to answer what you were asking, Desiree?
Yes. Yes. And I did have a secondary question.
Yes.
You touched upon the action of an archer or an artist who is so zoned in on what they are doing that they lose conscience relation to their identity. And we know this happens all the time with people who are absorbed in their art or absorbed in their music or just really in the zone, lose the sense of identity or name. I'm wondering what part, the psychic, the mental, the spiritual, is there a way to gauge what they are doing at that moment, what they are engaged in that moment?
Well, by coincidence, Thursday morning here in Baltimore, I heard a talk by a psychiatrist who's she calls herself a third generation psychiatrist. So her grandparents and a parent and herself are psychiatrists. She's created a business with high level sports athletes. And so this idea of being in the flow is clearly comes from the athletic world first, but she says, well, it applies to all of us in all aspects of our life. And she had this idea that there's a certain amount of tension or stress from being distressed or unstressed, and to have kind of like a middle ground of eustress, and then another dimension of complexity of the thing. So the archery or the painter, trying to express themselves artistically in the painting on the canvas or whatever medium they're in, there's going to be a skill. And so there's going to be a dynamic interplay between the amount of stress of the task they're under and the amount of skill. So if it's a simple skill you know how to do, it's like, big deal. I've done it 1,000 times. I can do it with my eyes closed. I can do it with the hand behind my back. No stress. So there is no flow in that. You would not get to that sort of selfless flow state. But she's analyzed and worked with these famous NBA athletes and Olympic athletes and says, yeah, there's this kind of XY axis and being in this place. And she and other psychologist types have looked at that. So I would say that's probably the way to make an actionable what to do to practice getting into that flow state. Choose something that's a little bit challenging, not too challenging or you get overwhelmed, but a little bit challenging, and something that requires a certain degree of your skill. So it'll connect to your Svadharma, your purpose. Like I'm a good baker, I'm a good pianist, I'm a good this, I'm a good that. Whatever it is you're doing, that skill, and then finding that balance point between the complexity of it and the stressfulness of it, and then that can allow you to be in that mental state. So I thought that was a fascinating sort of human athlete, medical, psychological, psychiatric perspective on Svadharma.
Isn't that something like being in the zone?
That is totally being in the zone. That's what this concierge psychiatrist working with athletes who pay her lots of money. That's what she's helping them to do, is get in the zone. And she'll deliberately teach them. She doesn't use Hindu language or Dharma, Dhyana, those kind of lingos. She just says, sit still, breathe, feel your body. So it's a mindfulness practice. She has them do breath work, simple breathing without calling it pranayama, so they don't get all freaked out. Oh, pranayama, what's that? But and these athletes are now doing these practices with a different lingo attached to them and get able to practice pranayama in a sense and practice dhyana and then get themselves into the zone.
Beautiful. Did you have another question, Desiree? I noticed your hand is still up.
Oh, let me put it down. Sorry about that. Thank you.
No worries. Laura.
Shall I go to Laura next? Yes.
Hello there. You.
Thank you, Ken, for the wonderful talk. In looking at the opening quote from the Bhagavad Gita by Mr. Judge, those men who constantly follow this by doctrine, and we would think that the doctrine of Krishna is karma, and without reviling it. And it was mentioned earlier about the tendency for our humanity to revile the doctrine of karma. But if we can do it, if we can follow the doctrine of karma without reviling it, it says that we shall be emancipated even by actions. What is the nature of that kind of emancipation? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the reverse of that is that if we do not revile, if we do revile karma, that we will perish devoid of discrimination. So that's from my notes. So what does that tell us about the nature of discrimination? If to revile karma would be to be devoid of discrimination.
Yes, I think that has to do with some of the conversation in the Gita between Arjuna and Krishna, where Krishna is saying, the discrimination is about understanding that we're in this world of the gunas, the rajas, tamas, and in a sense we're bound by this concatenation of nidanas on the one hand, yet on the other hand, the discrimination is the knowledge that you're not really who you think you are. And you're really not the actor doing these things. Although we're in this body, in this form, and the Shula Sarira and our different levels of our quaternary identity here is not really who we are. And of course, that's also not the part that reincarnates either. It's the higher Sutratman, the Atma Buddhimanas, that is who we are. And so the discrimination, I think, is being able to understand that and to know that, or like in the sci-fi thing, to grok that. But it's really to have an experience of it. And so for me, I've been able to talk about it for a long time from like a parrot saying things from a book, but really to understand it at some experiential gut level is, I think, a different aspect of the discrimination that Krishna is using that word discrimination in that quote.
So then what is the
divine.
nature of emancipation? What is the nature of emancipation?
Yeah, so that slide I have with freedom from the bonds or liberation. So the emancipation is like Mahatma Gandhi, the attorney Mohandas Gandhi, to be able to act, or like any adept, to act without having that balance sheet of good and bad karma, or that you have to work out in another incarnation. So in that emancipation, you might say we've reached such a level where we can then, like in the kayas, move into the world of being an adept, where our actions are actions we perform in the world, but there's no attachment to karma with those actions, because we have now disidentified with the egoic self. So I'm not doing the action at all, but yet our physical body, so this guy in the blue shirt still doing stuff, but it's not the guy in the blue shirt doing anything. So I think that's how the adept, that's my intellectual understanding, right? The words of what the adept is doing. And then the adept at the end of that lifetime is able then to move into these nirmanakaya states and go into those levels of liberation. But I think that's what this is talking about, this obligatory pilgrimage to those states of like nirmanakaya, sambhogakaya, dharmakaya. Does that get to what you're asking, Laura?
Yes, I think so. It's interesting when we slow down and contemplate these words in regards to the talks that are given. It helps us to come to a deeper understanding of them. That our understanding deepens with every talk when we read these words together.
Yes, I agree completely. I find it to be very valuable. I've enjoyed this so much, and I benefited from this group a lot. And we have time, Monica, with Miluka. I see.
Yes, absolutely, Miluka.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi
Well
there.
done again. This is is for deep thinking. I was thinking that in a world that we live, we are so externalized. We're always externalizing, you know what I mean? And it's like, it's difficult to come home within and be quiet and try to capture that essence that is in all of us, and not reflecting, because sometimes people say things and criticize others, but it's actually a reflection of what the inner battle they have within. And sometimes, instead of be quiet. There was one time this sage that somebody came and attacked him and said, you are an impostor and blah, blah, insulted. And then the sage stayed very calm and said to him, when you give a gift to somebody, where the gift belongs to? And he said, yours, of course. He said, no. And sort of your anger is yours. You know, and just no matter what happened around you, no matter where you are, if you can just have that calmness, always that forgiveness or loving within you, I think that will help us not to keep creating these actions that sometimes have it comes of our character, and then we react, and then we, instead of using our inner, we use our instinct, and it's a reaction, you know. And some people are kind of explosive and all that. But that what you were saying and what Laura was saying is that, you know, capture that, try to apply it. And it's not just meditation, sitting on meditation, that's wonderful too, but daily, every 5 minutes, every minute, whatever you get yourself going someplace else, is just to come back home and try to be calm and love. That's what we need in this world. There's so much hatred all over. We need love, and that love is what's going to heal the world. It's going to heal all of us. I mean, this is just my opinion, but thank you. It was terrific. I learned a lot.
Well, thank you, Maluka. And one thing I've heard in the world of pop philosophy about meditation is that meditation allows the practitioner to disidentify with their identity, and that's why I kind of spoke today from this lens of talking about Svadharma from the lens of levels of identity, from the little s ego identity to this more kind of like a spiritual, aspirational identity, and then to this higher level of higher manasic identity, and then with that little bridge of the Taijasi manas. And this process through meditational practices, so it's a skill you can do in the real world. You can actually sit still and practice meditation. And some people find practicing in a group to be very powerful and effective, that sort of mastermind phenomenon. And I must say, I've experienced it that way as well. Practicing meditation alone it's okay, but it seems like it's little booster rockets if I'm in a group of other people meditating. And the bare awareness meditation does allow us to disidentify with the self. And as you disidentify with yourself, then you say, okay, the guy that just cut me off in the freeway, or the person that's wasting my time at the cash register in the grocery store, all of that stuff is like, you're not worried about that anymore. It's just, okay, those are the things that happen in the world. People are just doing their thing. And your sense of identity isn't like, I'm so caught up with me, my important self, and my XYZ self, and I've got, this credential, or I'm CEO of that company, or I'm Bill Gates with $100 billion. It's like, these egoic identities, you can, through meditational skill building, learn to disidentify yourself with those lower elements. So I think that's one of the powerful things of a theosophical study group, is that we can encourage each other to continue to do these practices, which allow us then to become more in alignment with that love you mentioned, that beneficent balancing act, and getting to that pathway of this obligatory pilgrimage through love and compassion. And in the San Diego Lodge, one of the things we have on the wall there is the Kuan Yin pledge, and that's a huge aspirational thing. And I see in the little Zoom picture there by Monica, a little statue of Kuan Yin.
Yes.
Yes. And let me know, Monica, is there anything else in the chats?
I think that, wait a minute, did Maluka just say something?
I just say thank you so much.
Oh, okay. Yes. Here. Ken, this was a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much. Comprehensive and quieting in a way that we can all make use of. So thank you.